You're embarrassing me, Alana. Look around this table. Do you see yourself fitting in here? The words hit like a knife between her ribs, each syllable designed to cut deeper than the last. Alana Brooks felt her champagne glass tremble in her hand as Nathan Cole's voice carried across the private dining room at Philadelphia's most exclusive restaurant. The laughter that followed wasn't the warm kind shared between friends. It was the cruel, predatory sound of a pack sensing wounded prey. "Nathan, please," she whispered, but he cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Please what?" "Please pretend you belong in my world." His blue eyes, once tender when they looked at her, now held nothing but cold calculation. "Sarah here," he gestured to the blonde across from them. "She's a partner at Whitman and Associates. Marcus runs his family's investment firm. And you balance spreadsheets for small businesses in suburban Pennsylvania." The table erupted in barely concealed snickers. Sarah Martinez, Nathan's colleague and the woman Alana had tried so hard to befriend, covered her mouth with perfectly manicured fingers, but her eyes sparkled with malicious delight. Marcus Walker leaned back in his leather chair, studying Alana like she was an interesting specimen under a microscope. "I think what Nathan's trying to say," Marcus drawled, swirling his wine, "is that image matters in our circles. Perception is everything." "Exactly." Nathan's voice grew stronger, emboldened by his audience. "When I make partner next year, I'll be representing clients worth hundreds of millions. I need someone who can stand beside me at galas, who can charm investors' wives, who can—" He paused, letting his gaze travel over Alana's simple navy dress, her understated jewelry, her carefully styled but modest appearance. "Someone who looks the part." The diamond engagement ring on Alana's finger suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. 6 months ago, when Nathan had proposed in her small apartment above the bakery on Maple Street, he'd called her beautiful. He'd traced her cheekbones with gentle fingers and whispered that she was perfect exactly as she was. "You're saying I'm not attractive enough for you?" The question escaped before she could stop it, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. The silence that followed was deafening. Nathan's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Alana glimpsed something that might have been shame flickering across his features. But then his friends leaned forward expectantly, and whatever humanity had briefly surfaced vanished completely. "I'm saying," he said slowly, deliberately, "that you're adequate. For what you are. But I've realized I need more than adequate." Sarah gasped theatrically. "Oh my God, Nathan, you can't just—" "No, it's fine." Nathan's confidence was growing with each word, fed by the shocked attention of his audience. "Alana needs to hear this. She's a sweet girl, she really is. But sweet doesn't cut it in my world. I need someone who turns heads when she walks into a room. Someone who looks like she belongs on my arm at the governor's Christmas ball or the Bar Association's annual gala." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a stage whisper that somehow made his words even more devastating. "The truth is, Alana, you're just ordinary. And I can't build an extraordinary life with ordinary." The words landed like a physical assault, stealing the breath from Alana's lungs. Around the table, faces blurred as tears she refused to shed burned behind her eyes. These people, Nathan's colleagues, his friends, the social circle she'd tried so desperately to fit into over the past 6 months. They were all nodding along like Nathan was delivering some profound truth, rather than systematically destroying the woman who'd loved him. "Besides," Nathan continued, apparently warmed up now, "let's be honest about the financial reality here. Alana makes, what, $40,000 a year doing bookkeeping? I'm about to be pulling down 7 figures. The math just doesn't work." Marcus chuckled. "Brutal honesty. I respect that in a man. It's not brutal, it's practical." Nathan reached across the table and plucked the engagement ring from Alana's numb fingers with practiced ease, as if he'd rehearsed the motion. "I should have ended this months ago, but I kept hoping she'd evolve. Step up. But people don't really change, do they?" The ring disappeared into his jacket pocket with a finality that made Alana's chest constrict. 6 months of planning their future, 6 months of believing she'd found her person, 6 months of loving a man who'd apparently been calculating her inadequacies the entire time. All of it reduced to a piece of jewelry sliding into a pocket like discarded trash. "I hope you understand, Alana." Nathan's voice had taken on a patronizing tone that made her skin crawl. "This isn't personal. It's just business. Life. The way things work." Something cold and sharp crystallized in Alana's chest, cutting through the fog of humiliation and heartbreak. She looked up at Nathan's face, handsome, confident, utterly convinced of his own righteousness, and felt a door slam shut somewhere deep inside herself. The way things work. If only he knew. Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you are watching from. If you are new here or haven't already, please click that subscribe button because tomorrow, I have an even more special story for you and I do not want you to miss it. Alana stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. Every eye at the table tracked her motion, waiting to see if she'd break, if she'd cry, if she'd beg. The anticipation in their faces made her stomach turn. You're absolutely right, Nathan, she said quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. People don't really change. She picked up her purse, a simple black leather bag that Sarah had once sneeringly commented looked like it came from a department store, and slung it over her shoulder. The weight of it felt different now, heavier somehow, as if it contained more than just her wallet and keys. Goodbye. She turned and walked toward the restaurant's exit, her heels clicking against the marble floor in a steady rhythm that somehow managed to sound like a countdown. Behind her, she heard Nathan's voice, tinged now with uncertainty. Alana, wait, where are you going? She didn't turn around, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her face one more time. Instead, she pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the cool September evening, where her life as she knew it was already beginning to transform. What Nathan Cole didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman they'd just humiliated wasn't who she appeared to be. The modest accountant with the simple clothes and department store purse was hiding a secret that would have made their cruelest comments stick in their throats. As Alana walked down the sidewalk, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at the screen and saw a name she hadn't contacted in over 3 years. Margaret Walker, personal assistant to the Brooks estate. Miss Brooks, I trust you're well. The quarterly board meeting is next week. Your presence would be appreciated, though not required as always. The company misses your insight. Alana stared at the message for a long moment, then looked back at the restaurant where the man who'd called her ordinary was probably already celebrating his freedom with his friends. Through the tall windows, she could see Nathan's table, see him gesturing animatedly while Sarah hung on his every word. People don't really change. Nathan was wrong about that. People absolutely could change. They could transform completely when they realized they'd been living as less than they truly were. Alana typed a response to Margaret. Schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning. It's time I took a more active role in company operations. She hit send and slipped the phone back into her simple department store purse. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of reclaiming the life she'd walked away from 3 years ago. Tomorrow, she would stop hiding from who she really was. Tonight, she would mourn the woman she'd been trying to be. The woman who'd believed that love could exist without condition, that she could be valued for her heart instead of her inheritance, that a man like Nathan Cole could see past surface appearances to the person underneath. That woman was gone now, destroyed as thoroughly as Nathan had intended. What he hadn't expected was what would take her place. As Alana disappeared into the Philadelphia night, she carried with her the memory of every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every moment of calculated humiliation. She would remember all of it in the days to come. And Nathan Cole would learn, far too late, that the woman he'd dismissed as ordinary had always been extraordinary. She'd simply been kind enough to let him believe otherwise. The real Alana Brooks was about to wake up. And when she did, the people who'd hurt her would discover that some sleeping giants are better left undisturbed. 3 years ago, on a rain-soaked Tuesday that had changed everything, Alana Brooks had walked out of the gleaming 40-story headquarters of Brooks Innovations with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of determination to prove she was more than her father's fortune. Now, sitting in her modest one-bedroom apartment above Walker's Bakery in suburban Lansdale, Pennsylvania, she stared at the framed photograph on her nightstand. The last picture ever taken of her and her father, Dr. Marcus Brooks, founder of the biotech empire that bore their name. In the photo, she was 25, fresh out of Wharton Business School, her eyes bright with the naive belief that she could step into his shoes and earn the respect of a company that saw her only as a privileged princess playing at being a businesswoman. Her father's death from pancreatic cancer had been swift and devastating, leaving behind a $28 billion company and a daughter who'd never quite felt worthy of the legacy. The board of directors had made their feelings clear during the reading of his will. They would tolerate her presence as the majority shareholder, but they expected her to be a silent figurehead while they ran the company her father had built from nothing. "You're too young, Miss Brooks," Chairman Harrison Wells had said, his voice dripping with condescension. Too inexperienced. Your father was a visionary, a once-in-a-generation genius. Perhaps it's best if you let seasoned professionals handle the complexities of running a global enterprise. The other board members had nodded in agreement, their faces masks of polite dismissal. She'd seen the same expression tonight in Nathan's colleagues, the look that said she was decorative at best, irrelevant at worst. But her father had been different. He'd seen something in her that others missed, something that went beyond the Brooks name and the fortune it represented. In his final weeks, lying in the hospital bed that had become his world, he'd gripped her hand with surprising strength. They'll underestimate you, little star, he'd whispered, using the pet name he'd called her since childhood. Let them. It's the greatest advantage you'll ever have. Alana touched the small star-shaped pendant at her throat. The last gift he'd given her, a simple piece of jewelry that meant more to her than all the Brooks diamonds locked away in various safe deposit boxes around the world. She'd worn it every day for the past 3 years, a reminder of who she really was beneath the carefully constructed facade of ordinary. Her phone rang, jolting her from the memory. Margaret Walker's name appeared on the screen. No relation to the Marcus Walker who'd been part of tonight's humiliation, though the coincidence felt like salt in an already raw wound. Miss Brooks. Margaret's crisp British accent carried through the speaker. I received your message. Might I ask what's prompted this sudden interest in company affairs? Alana closed her eyes, seeing Nathan's face again, hearing his voice as he dismissed her as adequate, ordinary, not good enough for his precious image. Let's just say I've had a revelation about my priorities. I see. Margaret's tone suggested she understood far more than she was letting on. At 62, Margaret Walker had been her father's right hand for over 2 decades, the only person who'd truly known the extent of his plans for Alana's future. Shall I prepare the usual documentation for your visit tomorrow? No, Alana said quietly. I want everything. Financial reports, board meeting minutes, personnel files. I want to know every detail of how my company has been operating in my absence. The pause that followed was pregnant with significance. When Margaret spoke again, her voice carried a note of something that sounded almost like satisfaction. Your company, Miss Brooks. I'll have everything prepared. Might I suggest we start with the acquisition proposals that have been submitted over the past year? There are some interesting developments you should be aware of. What kind of developments? The kind that your father specifically warned might happen if you stayed away too long. Wolves circle when they sense weakness, Miss Brooks. Perhaps it's time to remind them that Brooks Innovations has never been weak. It's simply been patient. After hanging up, Alana moved to her laptop and began typing her resignation letter to the small accounting firm where she'd worked for the past 3 years. Howard and Associates had been good to her, treating her like just another employee, never questioning why someone with her obvious intelligence and skills was content to handle basic bookkeeping for local businesses. She'd treasured that normalcy, that sense of being valued for her work rather than her inheritance. When she'd met Nathan at a coffee shop 18 months ago, he'd been waiting in line behind her, frustrated by a client call that had gone poorly. She'd seen it as proof that her experiment in ordinary life was working. Here was a successful, ambitious man who'd fallen for plain Alana Brooks the accountant, not the heiress who graced the society pages. Or so she'd thought. The betrayal cut deeper now as she remembered the early days of their relationship. Nathan had been charming, attentive, genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. He'd complained about the superficial women in his professional circle, the ones who only cared about status and appearances. He'd told her she was refreshing, real, different from anyone he'd ever met. Different. The irony would have been laughable if it didn't hurt so much. Alana's fingers found her laptop keyboard, and she began researching the law firm where Nathan worked. Whitman and Associates specialized in corporate law, representing mid-tier companies in acquisitions and regulatory matters. Respectable but not prestigious. Nathan's ambitions clearly outstripped his current position, which explained his desperation to craft the perfect image. A few more keystrokes revealed something interesting. Whitman and Associates had been trying for months to land Brooks Innovations as a client, hoping to represent the company in a series of upcoming pharmaceutical acquisitions. The proposals had been sitting on Margaret's desk, waiting for Alana's input as the majority shareholder. Nathan Cole worked for a firm that was literally begging for her business, and he'd just spent the evening telling her she wasn't good enough for his world. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. Alana picked up her phone and scrolled to Nathan's contact information. For a moment, she hesitated, thumb hovering over the call button. Part of her, the part that had believed in their love, that had planned their wedding, that had dreamed of building a life with him, wanted to call and demand an explanation. Wanted to understand how someone who'd claimed to love her could destroy her so completely in front of strangers. But she already knew the answer. Nathan had never loved Alana Brooks, the accountant. He'd loved the idea of her, sweet, uncomplicated, grateful for his attention. The moment she'd become an inconvenience to his ambitions, that love had evaporated like morning mist. Instead of calling, she deleted his contact information entirely. Some bridges were meant to burn. Her laptop chimed with an email from Margaret, sent at nearly midnight with the efficiency that had made her indispensable to 2 generations of Brooks' leadership. The subject line was simple: welcome home. Attached were preliminary financial reports that made Alana's breath catch. Brooks Innovations had grown by 30% in the 3 years since she'd stepped back, driven by breakthrough treatments for genetic disorders and a revolutionary gene therapy program her father had launched just before his death. The company was now worth $42 billion. $42 billion. She thought of Nathan's comment about her $40,000 salary, his dismissive attitude toward her small business bookkeeping. If only he knew that she could buy his precious law firm with pocket change, could acquire every company his friends worked for before lunch on any given Tuesday. The second attachment was more interesting. A list of hostile takeover attempts that had been quietly repelled over the past 18 months. 3 different pharmaceutical giants had tried to acquire Brooks Innovations, convinced that the absent heiress would be easy prey for the right combination of money and pressure. They'd all been wrong. Margaret had handled each attempt with the cold precision of a chess master, using Alana's proxy voting rights and the loyalty of key board members who genuinely respected her father. But the attacks were escalating, and Margaret's email made it clear that Alana's continued absence was being interpreted as weakness by competitors who smelled blood in the water. The third attachment made her stomach clench with a familiar mixture of anger and determination. It was a detailed background report on the Brooks Innovations board members, complete with financial statements, personal relationships, and potential conflicts of interest. Chairman Harrison Wells, the man who dismissed her as too young and inexperienced 3 years ago, had been quietly shorting Brooks Innovations stock while publicly expressing confidence in the company's future. Board member Patricia Vance had been feeding inside information to her husband's investment firm. 3 other members had been taking consulting fees from competitors while sitting on Brooks' board. They'd all been betting on her failure, profiting from her absence while pretending to protect her father's legacy. The betrayal was comprehensive, systematic, and absolutely ruthless. Alana closed the laptop and walked to her bedroom window, looking out at the quiet street where she'd tried to build a normal life. Tomorrow morning, she would walk back into the world she'd abandoned, armed with 3 years of painful wisdom and a clarity of purpose she'd never possessed before. Nathan Cole thought he'd humiliated a helpless accountant who wasn't good enough for his precious image. He had no idea what he'd actually done. He'd awakened the sleeping heiress to a $42 billion empire, and she was about to remind everyone why her father had built that empire in the first place. Some lessons, Alana reflected as she prepared for bed, could only be learned through betrayal. Tonight, she'd graduated from every class she'd never wanted to take. Tomorrow, the real education would begin, and she wouldn't be the only one learning something new. Nathan Cole was about to discover that the woman he'd called ordinary was anything but. And by the time she was finished, everyone who'd laughed at her tonight would understand exactly what it meant to underestimate a Brooks. The Brooks Innovations headquarters rose from Philadelphia's financial district like a monument to ambition realized, its glass and steel facade reflecting the morning sun in patterns that seemed to shift with each passing cloud. Alana stood across the street at 7:30 a.m., studying the building her father had designed as a symbol of scientific progress and human potential. She'd forgotten how it felt to look at something and know it was truly hers. 3 years ago, she'd fled this building in tears, overwhelmed by board members who treated her like an inconvenience and employees who whispered behind her back about nepotism and inherited privilege. Today, she walked through the revolving doors wearing a charcoal gray suit that had cost more than most people's monthly rent, custom-tailored and kept in storage for 3 years, waiting for the day she might need to be Alana Brooks the heiress instead of Alana Brooks the accountant. The transformation was more than clothing. Her posture was different, shoulders back and chin raised with the confidence that came from knowing she owned everything around her. Her hair, usually worn in a simple ponytail, was styled in an elegant chignon that framed her face in ways that emphasized cheekbones Nathan had called merely adequate 12 hours earlier. The security guard at the front desk did a double take as she approached, recognition flickering across his weathered features. Miss Brooks. Carl Martinez had been working the lobby for 15 years, had known her since she was a teenager visiting her father during school breaks. We weren't expecting you. I know. Her smile was warm but carried an edge that hadn't been there 3 years ago. Is Margaret in? Yes, ma'am. Top floor. Should I call ahead? That won't be necessary. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt both eternal and instantaneous. Alana watched the numbers climb, each floor representing millions of dollars in assets, hundreds of employees whose livelihoods depended on decisions made in the boardrooms above. The weight of responsibility that had once terrified her now felt like armor. Margaret Walker was waiting when the elevator doors opened, her silver hair pulled back in the same severe bun she'd worn for 2 decades, her expression carefully neutral. But Alana caught the flash of something that might have been relief in the older woman's eyes. Miss Brooks. You look. Margaret paused, studying her with the analytical gaze that had made her legendary in corporate circles. You look ready. I am. Margaret's office occupied the corner of the executive floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the city. Alana had spent countless hours in this room as a child, doing homework while her father and Margaret planned the company's future. The space felt both familiar and foreign, like a childhood home revisited after years away. Coffee? Margaret asked, already moving toward the expensive machine that had been her father's one indulgence in an otherwise Spartan office setup. Please. Alana settled into one of the leather chairs facing Margaret's desk, crossing her legs in a gesture that was pure boardroom power play. I want to hear about the takeover attempts first. Margaret handed her a porcelain cup, the good china reserved for board meetings and important clients, and opened a thick file folder. Meridian Pharmaceuticals made the most aggressive play. They've been quietly acquiring shares through shell companies, building toward a hostile takeover. They're at 23% and climbing. Who's leading the effort? Dr. Richard Ashworth. He was your father's rival at Stanford, if you remember. He's never forgiven Brooks Innovations for beating Meridian to market with the gene therapy breakthrough. Alana did remember. Dr. Ashworth had been a frequent target of her father's withering commentary during family dinners, a brilliant scientist whose ego had consistently outstripped his ethics. What's his timeline? Based on the acquisition pattern, he's planning to make his move at next month's quarterly board meeting. He believes he can convince the board to accept a buyout offer if he can demonstrate that Brooks Innovations lacks stable leadership. The implication was clear. Alana's absence had given Ashworth the opening he needed to destroy everything her father had built. The guilt that followed that realization was sharp and immediate, but she pushed it aside. Guilt was a luxury she couldn't afford. Show me the board member files. For the next 2 hours, Margaret walked her through a catalog of betrayal that made Nathan's cruelty seem almost quaint by comparison. Chairman Wells had been systematically undermining company morale while positioning himself for a golden parachute when the takeover succeeded. Patricia Vance had been feeding Meridian inside information about Brooks' research pipeline. 3 other board members had been taking consulting fees from competitors. But it was the final file that made Alana's blood run cold. Dr. Elizabeth Kane, Margaret said quietly, her voice heavy with disappointment. Your father's protege. The woman he trusted to oversee the gene therapy program. Alana stared at the photograph of the woman who'd been like an aunt to her, who'd taught her to drive, who'd held her while she cried at her father's funeral. What did she do? She's been selling research data to Meridian for 18 months. Not enough to cripple our programs, but enough to give them a significant competitive advantage. The FBI investigation is ongoing, but the evidence is comprehensive. The betrayal hit harder than Nathan's public humiliation, harder than the board's conspiracy. Elizabeth had been family, the one person Alana had trusted completely when she'd walked away from the company. To learn that even she had been willing to sell out Marcus Brooks' legacy for money felt like losing her father all over again. How much? Alana's voice was barely above a whisper. $12 million over 18 months. Deposited in an account in the Cayman Islands. $12 million. A rounding error in Brooks Innovations' quarterly budget, but enough to convince Elizabeth to betray everything she'd claimed to believe in. Alana set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision, the sound of porcelain against porcelain unnaturally loud in the quiet office. I want a board meeting called for this afternoon. Full attendance, no exceptions. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. Miss Brooks, perhaps it would be wise to ease back into company operations gradually. The board hasn't seen you in 3 years. A sudden power play might. Might what? Alana's voice carried an authority that surprised them both. Might upset the people who've been betting against my company's success while lining their own pockets? Good. I want them upset. She stood and walked to the windows overlooking the city, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. Somewhere down there, Nathan was probably getting ready for work, confident that he'd successfully discarded an inadequate girlfriend without consequences. His friends were likely planning their next social gathering, secure in their belief that ordinary people like accountants were beneath their notice. They were all about to learn how wrong they'd been. There's something else, Margaret said carefully. Something your father asked me not to tell you unless you came back voluntarily. Alana turned from the window. What? Margaret opened her desk drawer and withdrew a sealed envelope bearing her father's handwriting. For Alana, when she's ready to be who she was born to be. He wrote this the week before he died. He made me promise to keep it until you chose to return to the company. Alana took the envelope with hands that trembled slightly, her father's familiar handwriting blurring as unexpected tears gathered in her eyes. She broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. My dearest little star, if you're reading this, it means you've decided to reclaim what's yours. I'm proud of you for walking away when you did. You needed to discover who you were beyond the Brooks name and fortune. But I always knew you'd come back when the time was right. The people who underestimated you, who dismissed you as too young or inexperienced, made a critical error. They confused kindness with weakness, patience with passivity. You have both your mother's compassionate heart and my strategic mind, a combination that makes you more formidable than any of them can imagine. Use what I taught you. Trust your instincts. And remember that the greatest victories come not from destroying your enemies, but from making them destroy themselves. The company needs you, but more than that, the world needs what you can build with Brooks Innovations. Don't just preserve my legacy, exceed it. All my love, Dad. P.S. Check the safe behind my portrait. The combination is your mother's birthday. I've left you some tools that might prove useful. Alana folded the letter carefully, her father's words settling into her bones like steel reinforcement. When she looked up at Margaret, her expression had transformed completely. Gone was any trace of the uncertain woman who'd entered the building that morning. Call the board meeting for 2 p.m., she said quietly. And Margaret, I want you to contact every major news outlet in Philadelphia. Tell them Brooks Innovations will be making a major announcement this afternoon regarding company leadership and future direction. Margaret's smile was sharp and approving. Shall I also inform our friends at Meridian Pharmaceuticals that their takeover timeline has just been accelerated? No need. They'll figure it out soon enough. As Margaret reached for her phone to begin making calls, Alana walked to the portrait of her father that dominated one wall of the office. Behind it, just as his letter had promised, was a safe she'd never known existed. Inside, she found documents that would have made Meridian's takeover attempt impossible even without her return. Contingency plans her father had put in place to protect the company from exactly the kind of corporate vultures now circling. But more importantly, she found a thick manila folder labeled personal security files, handle with care. Her father had been thorough in ways she'd never imagined. The folder contained detailed background investigations on everyone who'd entered Alana's life over the past few years. Her neighbors in Lansdale, her colleagues at the accounting firm, even casual acquaintances from coffee shops and grocery stores. Her father had been quietly protecting her from a distance, ensuring that no one was taking advantage of his daughter's deliberate anonymity. And there, near the back of the file, was Nathan Cole's complete dossier. The investigation was dated 8 months ago, 6 months after she'd started dating Nathan, clearly triggered by her father's concern when she'd mentioned her new boyfriend during one of their rare phone conversations. What she found made her stomach clench with a toxic mixture of vindication and disgust. Nathan Cole was drowning in debt. Student loans, credit cards, a second mortgage on a condo he couldn't afford, all hidden behind the facade of success he projected to the world. The investigation revealed systematic financial fraud at Whitman and Associates, where Nathan had been overcharging clients, billing for work not performed, and skimming retainer fees for personal use. He was 18 months away from bankruptcy and 6 months away from potential disbarment if his financial crimes came to light. But it was the personal section that revealed the true depth of his character. Nathan Cole had a pattern. Over the past 5 years, he dated 4 different women, each relationship lasting between 8 and 15 months. Each woman had been kind, successful in modest ways, and completely devoted to him. And each relationship had ended the same way, with Nathan publicly humiliating his girlfriend in front of his colleagues, systematically destroying her self-esteem before discarding her like trash. The previous girlfriend, Jennifer Martinez, had been a teacher who'd helped Nathan study for the bar exam. He'd dumped her at her own birthday party, telling her friends that she was too boring for his expanding social circle. Jennifer had suffered a nervous breakdown and taken a leave of absence from teaching. Before her, there had been Amy Walker, a nurse who'd worked double shifts to help Nathan pay for his expensive suits and networking events. He'd ended that relationship at a hospital charity gala, announcing to her colleagues that he needed someone with more sophistication as his career advanced. Amy had transferred to a different hospital in another state. The pattern was clear and devastating. Nathan Cole used women for emotional and financial support, then discarded them with maximum cruelty when they were no longer useful to his image. Alana hadn't been special to him. She'd been a mark, a target, just like all the others. The difference was that none of those other women had been Alana Brooks. At the bottom of Nathan's file, her father had written a single note in his precise handwriting. "This man will hurt you, little star. When he does, remember that pain is temporary but power is forever. Use both wisely." Alana closed the file with hands that had gone completely steady. The hurt was crystallizing into something much more dangerous. The cold, calculating fury that her father had called her greatest asset when properly channeled. She understood now why Nathan's law firm had been so desperate to land Brooks Innovations as a client. Whitman and Associates was hemorrhaging money, their reputation declining as rumors of Nathan's misconduct spread through Philadelphia's legal community. Landing a client like Brooks Innovations would have been their salvation, and Nathan's ticket to the partnership he'd been promised. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. Nathan had spent 18 months dating the heiress to the company that could have saved his career, and he'd never known it. He'd humiliated and discarded the one person who could have given him everything he'd ever wanted. And now, instead of salvation, she was going to give him exactly what he deserved. Alana walked back to Margaret's desk, where the older woman was just finishing her calls to the media. "The board meeting is set," Margaret reported. "I've also taken the liberty of calling security. Given the sensitive nature of what you've discovered, I thought it prudent." "Good." Alana's voice was calm, almost conversational. "And Margaret, I want you to reach out to James Morrison at Morrison and Associates." Margaret's eyes widened. Morrison and Associates was the most prestigious law firm in Philadelphia, the kind of white shoe establishment that firms like Whitman and Associates could only dream of competing with. "What shall I tell him?" "Tell him that Brooks Innovations is looking for new legal representation. Specifically, we need someone who specializes in financial fraud cases and professional misconduct. We have some very interesting information about lawyers who've been stealing from their clients." Understanding dawned in Margaret's expression, followed by something that looked remarkably like anticipation. "Consider it done, Miss Brooks." As Margaret reached for her phone again, Alana walked back to the windows overlooking Philadelphia. In a few hours, she would walk into a boardroom and reclaim control of her father's company. Before the day was over, Nathan Cole and everyone who'd helped him would understand that they'd made a fatal error in judgment. They'd mistaken Alana Brooks' absence for weakness, her kindness for vulnerability, her love for stupidity. In 6 hours, they would all learn that the woman they'd dismissed as ordinary had always been extraordinary. She'd simply been kind enough to let them believe otherwise. The real war was about to begin, and Alana Brooks had just remembered why her family never lost the wars that mattered. The Brooks Innovations boardroom fell silent as Alana entered at exactly 2 p.m., her heels clicking against marble floors with the measured precision of a countdown. 8 faces turned toward her. 8 people who'd spent 3 years managing her company in her absence. 8 people who'd grown comfortable with her irrelevance. That comfort was about to become very expensive. Chairman Harrison Wells recovered first, his practiced politician's smile sliding into place as he rose from his seat at the head of the long mahogany table. "Alana, what a pleasant surprise. We weren't expecting." "Sit down, Harrison." The quiet authority in her voice stopped him mid-sentence. For a moment, The 60-year-old man who'd run Fortune 500 companies looked uncertain, caught off guard by the woman who'd once deferred to his every suggestion. Alana took her place at the opposite end of the table, her father's seat, which had sat empty for 3 years, and opened the leather portfolio Margaret had prepared. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, then unbearable. 3 years ago, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room, I walked away from this company because I believed I wasn't ready to lead it. I thought I needed more experience, more wisdom, more time to grow into my father's legacy. She looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes with steady confidence. I was wrong. What I actually needed was to understand the difference between leadership and management, between loyalty and self-interest, between protecting a legacy and profiting from its destruction. Patricia Vance shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Alana, I'm not sure what you mean by. I mean this. Alana opened her portfolio and withdrew a thick stack of documents. Financial records showing that you've been selling Brooks Innovations research data to Meridian Pharmaceuticals for 18 months. Bank statements proving that Harrison has been shorting our stock while publicly expressing confidence in our future. Evidence that 3 other board members have been taking consulting fees from our competitors. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. I mean, Alana continued, her voice never rising above conversational level, that every single person in this room except Margaret has been betting on my failure while pretending to protect my father's company. Harrison's face had gone ashen. You can't prove. I can prove everything. Margaret appeared at Alana's shoulder, distributing copies of the evidence to each board member. Federal banking records, SEC filings, email communications, recorded phone calls. 3 years' worth of systematic betrayal, all documented with the thoroughness that Marcus Brooks taught his daughter to appreciate. Dr. Elizabeth Kane, her father's former protege, stared at the papers in front of her with dawning horror. Alana, you have to understand the company needed leadership. Instead, you gave it thieves. Alana's voice finally carried a trace of emotion, not anger, but something colder. Disappointment. You took my grief, my uncertainty, my absence, and you turned it into profit. You sold my father's life's work piece by piece, while telling yourselves you were protecting it. She stood, and every person in the room instinctively leaned back. Effective immediately, I'm resuming my position as majority shareholder and CEO of Brooks Innovations. Harrison, Patricia, Dr. Kane, and anyone else whose name appears in these files. You have 30 minutes to clean out your offices before security escorts you from the building. Margaret will provide you with information about the criminal and civil proceedings that will follow. You can't do this, Harrison sputtered, his composure finally cracking. The board has to vote. The board answers to the shareholders. I am 68% of the shareholders. Alana's smile was arctic. Democracy is a beautiful thing, Harrison, but this isn't a democracy. It's my company. As security guards entered the boardroom and began the process of removing the betrayers, Alana allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Phase 1 of her return was complete, but reclaiming Brooks Innovations was just the foundation for what came next. Nathan Cole still had no idea that the storm was coming for him. While chaos erupted 40 floors above, Nathan was having lunch at Giuseppe's, a mid-tier Italian restaurant where Whitman and Associates partners took clients when they needed to impress, but couldn't afford the truly exclusive establishments. He was celebrating with Marcus Walker and Sarah Martinez, regaling them with increasingly embellished versions of the previous night's engagement dissolution. You should have seen her face, Nathan laughed, twirling pasta around his fork with theatrical flourish. Completely deer in headlights. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Sarah giggled, already 3 glasses deep into a bottle of Chianti that Nathan was charging to the firm's entertainment account. Well, someone had to tell her the truth eventually. Better to be honest than string her along indefinitely. Nathan leaned back in his chair, the picture of satisfied confidence. I'm doing her a favor, really. Now she can find someone more appropriate to her station. Marcus raised his glass. To brutal honesty and strategic life choices. To knowing your worth, Nathan agreed, clinking glasses. None of them noticed the well-dressed woman at a nearby table who'd been listening to their conversation with growing disgust. Victoria Morrison was the daughter of James Morrison, senior partner at Morrison and Associates, and she'd heard enough to understand exactly what kind of man Nathan Cole was. She was also, as it happened, Margaret Walker's goddaughter. Victoria excused herself to the restroom and made a quiet phone call. Aunt Margaret? It's Victoria. You're never going to believe what I just overheard. By 4 p.m., Alana was alone in her father's office, her office now, reviewing the financial reports that revealed the true scope of Brooks Innovations' success during her absence. Despite the board's treachery, the company had thrived, driven by breakthrough treatments and research programs that had revolutionized genetic medicine. Her father had built something extraordinary, and she'd inherited an empire at its peak. Margaret knocked and entered without waiting for permission, a privilege earned through decades of loyalty. The media is having a field day, Margaret reported, settling into the chair across from Alana's desk. Stock price is up 12% since the announcement of your return. Meridian Pharmaceuticals' stock is down 8%. Dr. Ashworth is reportedly reassessing their acquisition timeline. Good. What about the other matter? Margaret's smile was predatory. Victoria happened to overhear Mr. Cole celebrating his newfound freedom at lunch today. Apparently, he's quite proud of his brutal honesty regarding your breakup. Alana felt that familiar cold fury settle in her chest. Even now, even after destroying her publicly, Nathan was using their relationship as entertainment for his friends. The cruelty was casual, unconscious, which somehow made it worse. Perfect. Is James Morrison available for a meeting? He's waiting in conference room A. James Morrison was everything Nathan Cole pretended to be. Successful, sophisticated, genuinely respected in Philadelphia's legal community. At 65, he built Morrison & Associates into the most prestigious firm in the city through a combination of brilliant legal strategy and unshakable ethical standards. He was also someone who took professional misconduct very personally. Miss Brooks, he said, rising as she entered the conference room. It's an honor to finally meet you. Your father spoke of you often during our business dealings. Thank you for taking the meeting on short notice, Mr. Morrison. When Margaret Walker calls about Brooks Innovations needing legal representation, I clear my calendar. His expression grew serious. I understand you have some concerns about attorney misconduct? Alana placed Nathan's file on the table between them. I have evidence of systematic financial fraud, client abuse, and professional misconduct by an attorney at Whitman & Associates. I'd like your firm to represent Brooks Innovations in both criminal and civil proceedings against the individual involved. Morrison opened the file and began reading, his expression growing darker with each page. After 10 minutes of silence, he looked up at Alana with something approaching respect. This is comprehensive. How long have you been investigating Mr. Cole? I haven't been investigating him at all. This information was compiled by my father's security team as a routine background check. Alana kept her voice level, professional. Mr. Cole was engaged to a woman my father cared about. He wanted to ensure she wasn't being taken advantage of. Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. I see. And this woman, does she know about Mr. Cole's activities? She does now. Understanding flickered in Morrison's eyes, followed by something that might have been approval. Miss Brooks, I should mention that my firm has been trying to poach talented attorneys from Whitman & Associates for some time. Their reputation has been declining lately. Several of their junior partners have been looking for new opportunities. Really? Yes. In fact, we've heard rumors that they're having significant financial difficulties. Losing a client like Brooks Innovations might be problematic for them. The irony was exquisite. Nathan had spent 18 months dating the woman who could have saved his firm, and instead of salvation, she was about to deliver destruction. Mr. Morrison, I'd like you to do something for me. I want you to offer Nathan Cole a position at your firm. Morrison blinked in surprise. I'm sorry. Offer him a job. Senior associate position, generous salary, signing bonus. Make it impossible to refuse. Miss Brooks, given what's in this file, I want him to accept the offer. I want him to quit Whitman & Associates, burn his bridges, celebrate his good fortune. Alana's smile was winter incarnate. And then, after he's committed completely, after he's told everyone about his success, after he's basked in his triumph, I want you to withdraw the offer. Morrison stared at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a note of something that sounded like admiration. And the reason for withdrawing the offer? Routine background check reveals financial fraud and professional misconduct. Standard operating procedure for a firm with Morrison & Associates reputation. The timing would be unfortunate for Mr. Cole. Once word spreads about misconduct serious enough to cost him a position at our firm, it would be difficult for him to find employment elsewhere. Yes, Alana agreed. It would be. Morrison closed the file and extended his hand. Miss Brooks, I believe this is the beginning of a very productive relationship. That evening, Nathan was at Sullivan's pub with his Whitman and Associates colleagues, celebrating what he'd convinced himself was the best decision he'd ever made. The atmosphere was celebratory, fueled by whiskey and the group delusion that they were all destined for greatness. To freedom from ordinary obligations, Nathan toasted, his words slightly slurred from his fourth drink. To upgrading, Marcus agreed. Sarah giggled. Poor little Alana probably went home and cried herself to sleep. She'll thank me eventually, Nathan declared with the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. When she finds someone more suitable to her level. His phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number he didn't recognize. Normally, he would have ignored it, but something made him answer. Nathan Cole. Mr. Cole, this is Janet Peterson from Morrison and Associates. Mr. Morrison would like to schedule a meeting with you regarding a potential opportunity at our firm. Nathan's heart stopped. Morrison and Associates was the pinnacle of Philadelphia's legal establishment, the kind of firm that could transform his career overnight. Yes, of course. When would be convenient? Tomorrow at 10 a.m. if you're available. Mr. Morrison is very interested in discussing your future with us. After hanging up, Nathan stared at his phone in disbelief. Morrison and Associates wanted to meet with him. Morrison and Associates, the firm that had never so much as acknowledged his existence, suddenly wanted to discuss his future. Everything okay? Sarah asked. More than okay. Nathan's grin was wide and genuine for the first time in months. Gentlemen, lady, I believe my ship has finally come in. None of them noticed the woman at the bar who'd been quietly listening to their conversation, or the way she smiled as she typed a text message on her phone. He took the bait. Meeting set for tomorrow at 10. In her office 40 floors above the city, Alana Brooks read the message and felt a satisfaction deeper than anything she'd experienced in 3 years. Nathan Cole thought he was about to get everything he'd ever wanted. He was about to discover that sometimes, when you think you're winning, you're actually just walking into a trap designed by someone far more intelligent than you'd ever imagined. The woman he'd called ordinary was orchestrating his downfall with a precision that would have impressed Sun Tzu himself. And the most beautiful part was that he still had no idea who she really was. Nathan Cole had never felt more confident in his life as he walked through the marble lobby of Morrison and Associates at 9:55 a.m. His best suit had been pressed to perfection, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and his smile carried the easy assurance of a man who believed the universe was finally recognizing his worth. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 30s, greeted him with professional warmth. Mr. Cole? Mr. Morrison is ready for you. James Morrison's office was everything Nathan had dreamed of, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Philadelphia's financial district, leather-bound law books, original oil paintings, and the subtle aroma of success that came from charging $1,000 an hour. Morrison himself was exactly what Nathan aspired to become. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, radiating the kind of quiet authority that came from 3 decades at the top of his profession. Nathan, Morrison said, rising from behind his massive mahogany desk. Thank you for coming. Please sit. Nathan settled into a chair that probably cost more than his monthly rent, trying to project calm confidence while his heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. I'll get straight to the point, Morrison said, returning to his seat. Morrison and Associates is expanding our corporate law division, and we're looking for experienced attorneys who can handle complex client relationships. Your work at Whitman and Associates has caught our attention. Nathan's pulse quickened. I'm honored that you'd consider me. The position would be senior associate, with a clear path to partnership within 3 years. Starting salary would be $300,000, plus bonuses, plus a $50,000 signing bonus. Morrison leaned forward slightly. I'm told you've been handling some significant corporate clients at your current firm? Yes, sir. I've been managing our most important accounts, developing relationships with major Philadelphia companies. Nathan's mind raced with possibilities. $300,000. A path to partnership. Respect, prestige, everything he'd ever wanted handed to him on a silver platter. Excellent. There is one client in particular we're hoping to cultivate, Brooks Innovations. Are you familiar with them? Nathan nodded eagerly. Of course. They're one of the biggest biotech companies in the region. Whitman and Associates has been trying to land them as a client for months. Yes, I'm sure they have. Morrison's smile was enigmatic. Well, Nathan, I'm prepared to offer you the position. Are you interested? Absolutely. Yes, sir, I'm very interested. Wonderful. I'll have our HR department prepare the paperwork. You can start Monday. Nathan felt like he was floating as he shook Morrison's hand. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. You won't regret this. I'm sure I won't. As Nathan left the office, riding the elevator down with a grin that wouldn't quit, Morrison picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. Miss Brooks? He took the offer. I'd estimate his ego is currently at maximum capacity. Perfect timing then, came Alana's voice, calm and controlled. Is everything ready for phase 2? The background check will be completed this afternoon. His employment will be terminated at exactly 5 p.m., just as he's leaving to celebrate his new career. And the other arrangements? The Pennsylvania Bar Association will receive their anonymous tip about his financial irregularities at the same time. The FBI will get their fraud evidence an hour later. Morrison paused. Miss Brooks, are you certain you want to proceed? This will destroy him completely. There was a long silence before Alana responded. Mr. Morrison, yesterday I was publicly humiliated by a man who called me ordinary, inadequate, and not good enough for his world. He did this in front of his colleagues for their entertainment, after 18 months of pretending to love me while stealing from his clients and lying about everything that mattered. He has a pattern of using and discarding women with calculated cruelty, and he was already planning how to leverage his new position to hurt his next victim. I understand. Do you? Because I need to be absolutely clear about something. This isn't just about revenge, though I won't pretend that's not part of it. This is about justice. Nathan Cole is a predator who uses charm and manipulation to destroy people weaker than himself. He's a thief who steals from clients who trust him. He's a liar who destroys women for sport. Someone needs to stop him. Morrison was quiet for a moment. And that someone is you. That someone is me. Nathan returned to Whitman and Associates walking on air, his good fortune practically radiating from his pores. The shabby offices that had felt oppressive just hours earlier now seemed like a launching pad for his brilliant future. He had a spring in his step as he knocked on senior partner Richard Whitman's door. Come in. Whitman looked up from his paperwork with the tired expression of a man watching his firm slowly sink into mediocrity. At 62, he built Whitman and Associates from nothing, but the last few years had been brutal. Losing clients, struggling with cash flow, watching younger firms poach their best talent. Richard, I need to speak with you about my future here. Oh! Whitman set down his pen, giving Nathan his full attention. What's on your mind? Nathan had rehearsed this speech during the elevator ride up, crafting it for maximum impact. I've received an offer from another firm. A very generous offer. Whitman's expression didn't change, but Nathan caught the flash of panic in his eyes. Losing Nathan would be a disaster. He was one of their few associates who actually brought in significant revenue, despite his questionable methods. I see. Which firm? Morrison and Associates. The pen slipped from Whitman's fingers, clattering onto his desk. Morrison and Associates didn't poach attorneys from firms like Whitman and Associates. They recruited from Harvard, Yale, Columbia. They didn't even acknowledge that firms like his existed. That's unexpected. What kind of offer? Senior associate. Clear path to partnership. $300,000 starting salary. Nathan paused for effect. Plus a $50,000 signing bonus. Whitman's face went ashen. There was no way his struggling firm could match that offer, and they both knew it. Nathan, we value you here tremendously. Is there anything we can do to convince you to stay? I'm afraid not, Richard. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Nathan stood, extending his hand with magnanimous grace. I'll finish out the week to help with the transition. Of course. Of course. Whitman shook his hand mechanically, already calculating how to break the news to the other partners. Congratulations, Nathan. You've earned this. As Nathan left Whitman's office, he felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with money or prestige. This was about respect, about finally being recognized for his worth. This was about proving that Nathan Cole belonged in the upper echelons of Philadelphia society. He spent the rest of the day fielding congratulations from colleagues who'd heard about his good fortune, accepting lunch invitations and drinks invitations and dinner invitations from people who suddenly wanted to be associated with his success. Sarah Martinez hung on his every word as he described Morrison's office, Marcus Walker pumped him for details about salary and benefits, and even the senior associates who'd previously ignored him stopped by his office to offer their best wishes. It was intoxicating. At 4:30 p.m., Nathan was packing up his personal belongings when his phone rang. Morrison and Associates caller ID. Nathan Cole. Mr. Cole, this is Janet Peterson from Morrison and Associates. I need to speak with you about your employment status. Something in her tone made Nathan's stomach drop. Is there a problem? I'm afraid so. Our routine background check has revealed some irregularities in your professional conduct. Mr. Morrison would like to see you immediately. Nathan's hands went cold. What kind of irregularities? It would be better if we discussed this in person. Can you be here in 15 minutes? The line went dead. Nathan stared at his phone, his brain refusing to process what he'd just heard. Background check irregularities? That was impossible. He'd been careful, meticulous about covering his tracks. His client billing might be creative, but it wasn't technically illegal. His financial problems were private matters that had nothing to do with his professional qualifications. This had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a simple conversation. 30 minutes later, Nathan sat across from James Morrison in the same chair where he'd received his dream job offered just hours earlier. But the atmosphere had changed completely. Morrison's warmth had vanished, replaced by the cold professionalism of a man delivering an execution. Nathan, I'm going to be direct with you. Our background investigation has uncovered evidence of systematic client billing fraud, misappropriation of firm funds, and professional misconduct spanning the last 3 years. Nathan's mouth went dry. Mr. Morrison, I think there's been some kind of mistake. Overbilling clients by an average of 30%. Charging for work performed by paralegals at attorney rates. Using firm credit accounts for personal expenses. Shall I continue? Each accusation hit like a physical blow. Nathan felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the office's air conditioning. Those are very serious allegations. I'd need to see your evidence before. Morrison opened a file folder and began removing documents. Bank statements. Billing records. Credit card receipts. 3 years of financial misconduct laid out in devastating detail. We also uncovered some personal information that raises questions about your character. Morrison withdrew another set of documents. A pattern of manipulative behavior toward romantic partners. Systematic emotional abuse followed by public humiliation. For different women over 5 years, all following the same pattern. Nathan's vision started to blur around the edges. This was impossible. No routine background check went this deep, uncovered this much personal information. Someone had been investigating him specifically, had spent significant time and money documenting his every mistake and moral failing. Who did this investigation? Nathan's voice came out as a whisper. That's confidential. What matters is the results. Morrison closed the file with finality. Obviously, Morrison and Associates cannot extend employment to someone with these ethical issues. Consider our offer withdrawn. But I already quit my job. I already told everyone. That was your choice, Mr. Cole. Morrison's voice carried no sympathy whatsoever. I should also mention that we have a professional obligation to report these findings to the Pennsylvania Bar Association. The evidence of client fraud is quite compelling. Nathan felt the room spinning around him. His career, his reputation, his entire future. All of it collapsing in the span of a single conversation. You can't do this to me. This will destroy everything I've worked for. Mr. Cole, you destroyed everything you worked for the moment you decided to steal from clients and abuse women who trusted you. Morrison stood, the meeting clearly over. Security will escort you from the building. As Nathan was led through the Morrison and Associates lobby in a daze, his phone began buzzing with text messages. Word traveled fast in Philadelphia's legal community, and someone had already leaked news of his spectacular fall from grace. Sarah, OMG, what happened? Heard Morrison fired you before you even started? Marcus, dude, the rumor mill is going crazy. Did you really get caught stealing from clients? Whitman, Nathan, we need to talk. Reporters are calling asking about your time here. Nathan stopped reading after that. Reporters. The Bar Association would investigate, probably file charges. His name would be in the papers, his crimes laid out for everyone to see. He'd never practice law again, never work in any respectable profession, never recover from the scandal. His phone rang, and without looking at the caller ID, he answered. Nathan. The voice was familiar, feminine, concerned. For a moment, his heart leaped with hope. Someone who cared about him, someone who might help him through this nightmare. Yes, this is Jennifer Martinez. I heard about what happened today. Jennifer, his ex-girlfriend from 2 years ago, the teacher he'd humiliated at her own birthday party. Nathan's stomach clenched with a fresh wave of shame. Jennifer, how did you hear? The story's already online. Rising legal star falls from grace in fraud scandal. It's everywhere. Her voice was steady, but Nathan could hear something underneath it. Not sympathy, but something harder. I wanted you to know that when the reporters call me, I'm going to tell them the truth about what you did to me. Jennifer, please. And Amy Walker feels the same way. And Lisa Rodriguez. All of us, Nathan. We're all going to tell them exactly what kind of man you really are. The line went dead. Nathan stood on the sidewalk outside Morrison and Associates, his entire world reduced to rubble around him. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. The women he'd hurt were coming forward to ensure he never hurt anyone else. Everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for, everything he'd believed about himself, all of it was gone. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a terrible suspicion was beginning to form. This wasn't random bad luck or coincidental timing. This was too thorough, too coordinated, too perfectly designed to cause maximum damage. Someone had orchestrated his destruction with surgical precision. Someone who'd known exactly how to hurt him most. Nathan thought about the last few days, trying to identify who might have this kind of power, this level of resources and connections. But his mind kept coming back to the same impossible conclusion. The only person who'd have motivation for this level of revenge was Alana Brooks. But Alana was nobody. An accountant from the suburbs who made $40,000 a year and wore department store clothes. She didn't have the connections or resources to destroy a man's career overnight. Did she? As Nathan stood on the sidewalk, destroyed and friendless and facing criminal charges, he finally began to wonder if there might have been more to his ordinary ex-fiancé than he'd ever imagined. But by then, of course, it was far too late to matter. Nathan Cole spent 3 sleepless nights in his overpriced condo, watching his world crumble in real time through his laptop screen. The Philadelphia Legal Tribune had run the story with devastating thoroughness. Whitman and Associates attorney terminated for fraud, professional misconduct under investigation. The article included quotes from 3 of his ex-girlfriends, detailed financial records, and a statement from the Pennsylvania Bar Association confirming their intention to pursue disciplinary action. By Friday morning, Nathan's name was trending on legal Twitter, and not in a good way. He'd stopped answering his phone after the 20th call from reporters, but the texts kept coming, friends, colleagues, even casual acquaintances, all wanting to know if the stories were true. The worst part was watching people he'd considered allies distance themselves with surgical precision. Their responses ranging from shocked disappointment to barely concealed satisfaction at his downfall. Marcus Walker. Man, I had no idea about any of this. Need to protect my reputation right now, you understand. Sarah Martinez. I can't be associated with this kind of scandal. Don't contact me again. Richard Whitman. Nathan, the firm is conducting our own internal investigation. Please don't return to the office. One by one, every relationship Nathan had cultivated was severing itself from the toxicity of his exposure. He was becoming a pariah overnight, and the isolation was suffocating. But it was the call from his landlord that finally drove home the full scope of his predicament. Mr. Cole, I'm calling about your rent. It's the 5th of the month. Nathan stared at his nearly empty bank account on his laptop screen. Without the Morrison job, without any job prospects, without the signing bonus he'd already mentally spent, he was facing financial ruin within weeks. I need a few more days to. I've been reading about you in the papers, Mr. Cole. Financial fraud, professional misconduct, criminal investigation. I'm going to need you to vacate the premises by the end of the month. You can't evict me without proper notice. Check your lease agreement. The moral turpitude clause gives me broad discretion in cases of criminal behavior. The line went dead. Nathan threw his phone across the room, watching it shatter against the expensive brick wall he'd been so proud of when he'd signed the lease. Everything was falling apart, and he still didn't understand how it had happened so quickly, so completely. That's when his doorbell rang. Through the peephole, Nathan saw a woman he didn't recognize, mid-30s, professional attire, carrying a leather briefcase. She looked like a lawyer or investigator, and Nathan's first instinct was to pretend he wasn't home. But desperation made him open the door. Mr. Cole? I'm Detective Linda Reeves, Philadelphia Police Department, White Collar Crimes Division. I need to ask you some questions about your business practices at Whitman and Associates. Nathan's knees nearly buckled. I should probably have a lawyer present. That's your right. But I should mention that we're offering cooperation agreements to attorneys who provide information about systemic fraud in Philadelphia law firms. It might be worth hearing what we have to offer. Against every instinct screaming in his head, Nathan let her in. Detective Reeves settled into his living room like she owned it, opening her briefcase with businesslike efficiency. Mr. Cole, we have evidence of financial irregularities at multiple law firms in Philadelphia. Overbilling, client fund misappropriation, fabricated billing records. The scope is much larger than initially suspected. I don't understand what this has to do with me. Your case was the thread that unraveled the whole sweater. She pulled out a thick file. Someone provided us with documentation of your activities at Whitman and Associates. But as we investigated, we discovered similar patterns at other firms. This is now a city-wide investigation. Nathan felt a flicker of hope. If this was part of a larger investigation, maybe he wasn't the primary target. Maybe he could negotiate his way out of complete destruction. What kind of cooperation are you looking for? Names, methods, which partners knew about the billing irregularities. Help us understand the system, and we can recommend reduced charges. Detective Reeves leaned forward. But I should be clear, Mr. Cole. Someone wants you specifically to go down for this. The evidence package we received was incredibly detailed, incredibly personal. Someone spent serious time and money to document your every mistake. There it was again. The suggestion that someone had orchestrated his downfall with calculated precision. Who provided the evidence? Anonymous tip through a law firm. Morrison and Associates forwarded it to us as part of their professional obligations. Detective Reeves studied Nathan's face carefully. Do you have any idea who might want to see you destroyed so thoroughly? Nathan's mind immediately went to Alana, but he pushed the thought away. It was impossible. She was nobody, a small-town accountant with no connections, no resources, no power. The idea that she could orchestrate something this comprehensive was ridiculous. I know. I can't think of anyone. Detective Reeves made a note in her file. Well, someone clearly has strong feelings about your conduct. The evidence package included personal details that go well beyond professional misconduct. Character witnesses, documentation of personal relationships, even psychological profiles of your former romantic partners. She paused, letting that sink in. Mr. Cole, in 15 years of investigating white-collar crime, I've never seen anyone put this much effort into destroying a single individual. Whoever did this has resources, connections, and a very personal motivation. After Detective Reeves left with Nathan's reluctant agreement to cooperate, Nathan paced his condo like a caged animal. The walls seemed to be closing in, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he forced himself to really think about who might have the power to orchestrate such comprehensive destruction. The evidence was too detailed, too personal, too perfectly timed to be random. Someone had been planning this for months, maybe longer. Someone with serious money, serious connections, and serious motivation. Nathan pulled out his laptop and began researching, starting with the law firm that had forwarded his evidence to the police. Morrison and Associates was one of Philadelphia's most prestigious firms, representing Fortune 500 companies and high-net-worth individuals. They didn't take on random cases or provide anonymous tips to law enforcement, unless they were representing someone very important. Nathan's fingers hesitated over the keyboard as a terrible possibility occurred to him. He typed Alana Brooks, Philadelphia, into the search engine, expecting to find nothing more than her modest accounting firm profile. What he found instead made his blood run cold. The first result was a news article from that morning. Brooks Innovations heiress returns to lead biotech empire. The accompanying photograph showed Alana Brooks, his Alana, ordinary Alana who wore department store clothes and worked for $40,000 a year, standing in a corporate boardroom wearing a suit that cost more than his monthly rent. But it was the headline that made Nathan's world tilt completely off its axis. Missing heiress worth $28 billion returns after 3-year absence. $28 billion. Nathan stared at the screen until the words blurred together. The woman he'd called ordinary, the woman he'd said wasn't good enough for his world, the woman he'd publicly humiliated for making only $40,000 a year, she was worth $28 billion. The article detailed her return to Brooks Innovations, her removal of corrupt board members, her plans to expand the company's research programs. It mentioned her father's death 3 years earlier, her decision to step away from corporate life to live among ordinary people and understand their struggles. Nathan scrolled through more articles, each one adding another layer to his growing horror. Forbes had named her one of the most powerful women in biotechnology. The Wall Street Journal had run a profile calling her the sleeping giant of pharmaceutical innovation. Bloomberg had estimated her personal net worth at over $40 billion when accounting for her company's growth during her absence. She wasn't just wealthy. She was one of the richest people in America. And Nathan had called her ordinary. His hands shaking, Nathan searched for more recent news. What he found made his stomach drop through the floor. Brooks Innovations selects Morrison & Associates for legal representation. The article was dated 2 days ago, just hours before Nathan's world had imploded. It was all connected. Alana had hired Morrison & Associates, provided them with evidence of Nathan's crimes, orchestrated his fake job offer and spectacular downfall. She'd used her vast resources and connections to systematically destroy him, and he'd never seen it coming because he'd been too arrogant to look past her carefully constructed facade. Nathan's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Cole, this is Margaret Walker, personal assistant to Miss Brooks. Miss Brooks would like to meet with you tomorrow at 2 p.m. The Ritz-Carlton, Presidential Suite. Please confirm your attendance." Nathan stared at the message, his hands trembling uncontrollably. After 3 days of wondering who had orchestrated his destruction, the answer was finally revealing itself. But knowing the truth didn't make him feel better. It made him feel infinitely worse. He'd humiliated a billionaire heiress in front of his friends, called her inadequate and ordinary, dismissed her as not good enough for his precious image. He'd broken off their engagement with calculated cruelty, turned their relationship into entertainment for people who'd never mattered. And now she wanted to meet. Nathan typed back with shaking fingers. "I'll be there." He set down his phone and looked around his condo. The expensive furniture he couldn't afford, the artwork he'd bought to impress people who didn't care about him, the life he'd built on lies and theft and casual cruelty. In less than 24 hours, he'd be facing the woman whose heart he'd broken, whose dignity he'd trampled, whose love he'd thrown away like garbage. Except she wasn't the helpless victim he'd imagined. She was one of the most powerful people in America, and she'd been playing chess while he was playing checkers. Tomorrow, Nathan would learn what it felt like to be ordinary, inadequate, and not good enough for someone else's world. And unlike him, Alana Brooks would have every right to feel that way. Meanwhile, 40 floors above Philadelphia's financial district, Alana Brooks stood at her office windows, watching the city sparkle in the evening light. Margaret had just confirmed Nathan's acceptance of the meeting invitation, and Alana felt a calm satisfaction settle over her like armor. Phase 1 had been completed with surgical precision. Nathan's career was over, his reputation destroyed, his future obliterated. His friends had abandoned him, his financial security evaporated, his victims were speaking out to ensure he never hurt anyone else. But destroying Nathan Cole had never been the endgame. That was just the foundation for what came next. Tomorrow, she would give him the opportunity to see her as she truly was. Not the ordinary woman he'd dismissed, but the extraordinary woman he'd never deserved. She would let him understand the full scope of what he'd lost, what he'd thrown away, what he'd been too blind and arrogant to recognize. And then she would teach him the most important lesson of his worthless life. That some people are beyond his reach not because they're ordinary, but because they're so far above him that he couldn't see the summit from where he stood. Tomorrow, Nathan Cole would meet the real Alana Brooks. And she would show him exactly what $40 billion worth of disappointed love looked like. The Ritz-Carlton's presidential suite occupied the entire top floor, accessible only by private elevator with a key card that cost more per night than Nathan's monthly salary used to be. As he rode up in silence at exactly 2 p.m., Nathan caught his reflection in the polished brass doors, hollow-eyed, unshaven, wearing his second-best suit because his best had been repossessed along with most of his furniture that morning. He looked like what he was, a broken man with nothing left to lose. The elevator doors opened directly into the suite's foyer, revealing luxury beyond anything Nathan had ever experienced. Original paintings lined the walls, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over marble floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Philadelphia that made him feel like he was floating above the city. And there, silhouetted against those impossible windows, stood Alana Brooks. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. The woman facing him was simultaneously the Alana he remembered and a complete stranger. She wore a midnight blue designer dress that probably cost more than his car, her hair styled in an elegant updo that emphasized the aristocratic bone structure he'd somehow overlooked for 18 months. Her posture radiated the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing you owned everything you surveyed. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. The same warm brown eyes he'd looked into when he'd proposed, when he'd whispered promises about their future, when he'd told her he loved her. Except now those eyes held something he'd never seen before. Absolute, terrifying control. "Hello, Nathan." Her voice was exactly as he remembered, but stripped of the softness, the deference, the eagerness to please that had defined their entire relationship. "Thank you for coming." "Alana, I..." Nathan's voice cracked like a teenager's. "I don't even know where to begin." "Then don't." She moved away from the windows with fluid grace, settling into one of the suite's impossibly expensive leather chairs and gesturing for him to take the seat across from her. "I'll begin." Nathan sat, his hands trembling as he tried to process the surreal nature of the situation. 4 days ago, he'd been the one in control, the one with power, the one deciding Alana's worth and finding her lacking. Now he was a supplicant in a palace, begging an audience with a queen he'd never known existed. "You're wondering how I did it," Alana said, crossing her legs with the kind of casual elegance that screamed old money. "How the ordinary little accountant who wasn't good enough for your world managed to destroy your career, your reputation, and your future in less than a week." Nathan nodded mutely, not trusting his voice. "The answer is actually quite simple, Nathan. You were never in my league to begin with." She leaned back in her chair, studying him with the detached interest of a scientist examining a particularly unimpressive specimen. "You spent 18 months dating one of the wealthiest women in America, and you never once wondered why I was content to live in a one-bedroom apartment above a bakery. I thought you were just modest. Humble. Humble." Alana smiled, and Nathan felt ice form in his veins. "Is that what you called it when you mocked my $40,000 salary in front of your friends? When you said I was financially incompatible with your 7-figure aspirations?" The memory hit Nathan like a physical blow. He'd been so proud of that moment, so confident in his superiority. Now the words felt like acid in his throat. "Alana, I was wrong. I was cruel and wrong, and I'm sorry." "Sorry." She interrupted him with a laugh that held no warmth. "You're sorry? How fascinating." She reached for a crystal decanter on the side table, pouring herself 2 fingers of what Nathan suspected was whiskey worth more than his monthly rent. "Tell me, Nathan, what exactly are you sorry for?" The question felt like a trap, but Nathan stumbled forward anyway. "For hurting you. For humiliating you. For saying those terrible things about you in front of everyone." "Ah, but you see, that's where you're wrong." Alana took a sip of her drink, savoring it like fine art. "You didn't hurt me, Nathan. You revealed yourself. There's a difference." She set down her glass and leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "For 18 months, I wondered if I'd found something real. A man who could love me for who I was rather than what I had. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd discovered someone who saw past the surface to the person underneath." Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "You proved me right, actually. You did see past the surface. You just didn't like what you found there." "That's not true. Isn't it?" Alana stood and walked to a mahogany desk Nathan hadn't noticed before. From it, she withdrew a familiar manila folder. "This is the complete dossier my father's security team compiled on you. Would you like to know what they found?" Nathan's mouth went dry. "Alana, please." "They found a man drowning in debt, but too proud to admit it. A man stealing from clients while pretending to be successful. A man with a pattern of using women for emotional and financial support before discarding them with calculated cruelty." She opened the folder, revealing pages of documentation that Nathan recognized with growing horror. "They found a predator, Nathan. Someone who hurt people weaker than himself because it made him feel powerful." Nathan felt tears burning behind his eyes. "I know I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" Alana's voice finally carried a trace of emotion, not hurt, but disgust. "Jennifer Martinez had a nervous breakdown after you humiliated her. Amy Walker transferred to another state because she couldn't face the colleagues who witnessed your public rejection. Lisa Rodriguez still has anxiety attacks when men raise their voices around her." Each name hit Nathan like a hammer blow. He'd told himself those women had been fine, that they'd moved on, that his actions hadn't really mattered in the long term. But you, Alana continued, returning to her chair with predatory grace, you made one critical error in judgment. You applied that same pattern to the wrong woman. I know I did. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Are you sorry because you hurt me, Nathan? Or are you sorry because you finally understand who you were hurting? The question hung in the air like a blade. Nathan opened his mouth to answer, then closed it as he realized the truth. He wasn't sorry about hurting Alana Brooks, the accountant. He was terrified about having hurt Alana Brooks, the billionaire heiress. Alana saw the realization in his face and nodded approvingly. At least you're honest with yourself now. That's progress. She reached for her phone and typed a brief message. Moments later, the suite's door opened and Margaret Walker entered, carrying a leather briefcase that looked expensive enough to fund Nathan's legal defense. Nathan, Alana said as Margaret set the briefcase on the coffee table between them, I'm going to offer you a choice. It's the last choice you'll ever get to make regarding your relationship with me, so I suggest you consider it carefully. Margaret opened the briefcase, revealing 2 thick legal documents. Option 1, Alana continued, her voice businesslike now. You sign this confession detailing every crime you've committed, every woman you've hurt, every ethical violation you've participated in. You plead guilty to all charges, accept full responsibility for your actions, and spend the next 5 to 7 years in federal prison. When you get out, you'll be permanently disbarred, but you'll be alive and free to build whatever small life you can manage. Nathan stared at the first document, his vision blurring as he tried to process the magnitude of what she was offering. Prison. Years of his life gone, his career permanently destroyed, his reputation obliterated forever. Option 2, Alana said, indicating the second document. You fight the charges. Claim innocence, hire expensive lawyers you can't afford. Drag this out for years while your debt compounds and your notoriety grows. You'll lose eventually, the evidence is overwhelming, but you'll spend every day of those years knowing that Alana Brooks, the woman you called ordinary, is watching your destruction with the same detached interest she might show a mildly entertaining television program. Nathan looked up at her, desperation making his voice crack. What happens if I choose option 2? You'll spend the next 3 to 5 years fighting criminal charges, civil lawsuits from your victims, and bankruptcy proceedings while your case becomes a cautionary tale in every law school in America. Then you'll go to prison anyway, but for longer, because judges don't appreciate defendants who waste the court's time. Margaret placed a gold pen on the table between the documents. But there's a third element to consider, Alana continued, her voice softening slightly. The women you hurt, Jennifer, Amy, Lisa, and the others, they deserve closure. They deserve to hear you admit what you did to them, to know that their pain was real and witnessed and acknowledged. For the first time since entering the suite, Nathan saw a flicker of the woman he'd thought he'd loved. Not the queen in her palace, not the billionaire dispensing justice, but the person who genuinely cared about the suffering of others. If you choose option 1, she said quietly, I'll ensure those women receive financial compensation for the therapy they needed, the career opportunities they lost, the years of their lives you stole from them. If you choose option 2, they'll have to testify at your trial, relive their humiliation in open court, and watch you claim they're lying about what you did to them. The choice crystallized with brutal clarity. Nathan could protect himself and force his victims to suffer through years of legal proceedings, or he could accept responsibility and give them the peace they deserved. He looked at Alana, really looked at her, and for the first time in 18 months he saw her clearly. Not as an accessory to his ambitions or an inadequate reflection of his worth, but as a person. A brilliant, compassionate, extraordinary person he'd been too selfish and shallow to appreciate. Why? He whispered. Why give me a choice at all? You could have just destroyed me without this conversation. Alana's expression softened fractionally. Because despite everything you did to me, Nathan, I'm not you. I don't hurt people for sport or entertainment. I don't destroy lives because it makes me feel powerful. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I wanted you to understand the full scope of what you lost when you decided I wasn't good enough for your world. But more than that, I wanted to give you the chance to be better than you've been. Nathan stared at the documents, the pen, the woman who'd just offered him something he'd never given anyone else. Genuine mercy wrapped in justice. If I sign the confession, he said slowly, if I plead guilty and go to prison, what happens to you? Do you get what you need from this? Alana considered the question for a long moment. I get to know that the women you hurt have found peace. I get to know that you'll never hurt anyone else the way you hurt them. I get to know that somewhere in a federal prison, you'll have time to think about the choices that led you there. And that's enough for you? That's justice. Nathan, Alana said softly, justice isn't about what I get. It's about what the world gets. A world where men like you face consequences for their actions. A world where women like Jennifer and Amy and Lisa don't suffer in silence while their abusers prosper. Nathan reached for the pen with shaking hands. As his fingers closed around the gold barrel, he looked up at Alana one final time. For what it's worth, he said, his voice barely audible, I did love you. I just didn't know how to love someone better than myself. Alana's smile was sad but genuine. I know you did, Nathan. In your own limited way, I know you did. Nathan began to sign his name, each letter feeling like a small death and a small rebirth. When he finished, he looked up to find Alana watching him with something that might have been respect. Thank you, she said quietly, for choosing to be better. As Margaret collected the signed confession, Nathan realized that this was the first time in years, maybe in his entire adult life, that he'd chosen to do the right thing when it cost him everything. It felt like waking up from a long, terrible dream. What happens now? He asked. Now you face the consequences of your choices with dignity, Alana replied. And maybe someday you become the kind of man who deserves the love you threw away. Nathan nodded, understanding that this was goodbye, not just to Alana, but to the shallow, cruel person he'd been for so long. As he walked toward the elevator that would take him back down to earth, he turned for one last look at the woman who'd taught him the difference between justice and revenge. She was already back at the windows, silhouetted against the city she owned, and Nathan realized that she'd never looked more beautiful or more unreachable than she did in that moment. He'd spent 18 months with an angel and never noticed her wings, because he was too busy looking for flaws. The elevator doors closed on that realization, carrying him down to face a future that would be harder, but more honest than anything he'd built on lies. In the presidential suite, Alana Brooks stood alone with her victory, and for the first time since this began, she allowed herself to grieve the love she'd lost and the man Nathan might have been if he'd chosen to be worthy of it. 6 months later, Alana Brooks stood in the lobby of the Philadelphia Women's Crisis Center, watching as the final touches were put on a bronze plaque that would bear her father's name. The Dr. Marcus Brooks Foundation for Supporting Survivors of Emotional Abuse was about to open its doors, funded by a $40 million endowment that Alana had established the week after Nathan's confession made headlines. The center occupied an entire renovated building in downtown Philadelphia, offering free counseling, legal aid, and career rehabilitation for women who'd been psychologically destroyed by manipulative partners. It was, Alana reflected, the most meaningful thing she'd done with her wealth since inheriting it. Miss Brooks, Dr. Sarah Walker, the center's director and a leading expert in trauma recovery, approached with a warm smile. We're ready for the dedication ceremony. Alana nodded, straightening the simple black dress she'd chosen for the occasion. After months of wearing designer suits and power outfits as she'd reclaimed control of Brooks Innovations, she'd deliberately chosen something understated for today. This wasn't about her. It was about the women who would find healing within these walls. The main conference room was packed with an unlikely mixture of people. City officials, mental health professionals, and journalists sat alongside women whose stories had become part of Nathan Cole's confession. Jennifer Martinez, Amy Walker, Lisa Rodriguez, and 12 others who'd come forward once they learned they weren't alone in their experiences. Margaret Walker took the podium first, her voice carrying the authority that had made her legendary in business circles. Ladies and gentlemen, 3 years ago, Dr. Marcus Brooks' daughter walked away from a $40 billion empire because she wanted to understand what it meant to live as an ordinary person. Today, she's using that empire to ensure that no woman has to face extraordinary cruelty alone. Polite applause rippled through the room as Alana approached the podium, but she could feel the real energy coming from the survivors in the front row. Women who'd found their voices again because someone had finally listened to their pain. When my father built Brooks Innovations, Alana began, her voice steady and clear, he told me that the greatest discoveries come from understanding suffering and then working to eliminate it. For 3 years, I lived among people who struggle with problems that money can't solve, loneliness, betrayal, the kind of emotional wounds that leave invisible scars. She paused, her eyes finding Jennifer Martinez in the audience. The former teacher had returned to Philadelphia specifically for this ceremony, her confidence rebuilt through months of therapy funded by the settlement from Nathan's crimes. I learned that wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the ability to heal the world's pain instead of causing it. True power isn't the ability to destroy your enemies. It's the ability to transform them into better versions of themselves. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. 6 months ago, a man I once loved taught me a valuable lesson about the difference between ordinary and extraordinary. He believed that extraordinary meant having more money, more status, more power than the people around you. He was wrong. Alana's voice grew stronger, filled with the conviction that had transformed her from hiding heiress to purposeful leader. Extraordinary means using whatever gifts you've been given to lift up the people society overlooks. It means taking your pain and turning it into healing for others. It means choosing justice over revenge, growth over destruction, hope over despair. She gestured toward the survivors in the front row. These women are extraordinary because they survived betrayal and chose to speak their truth. They're extraordinary because they turned their suffering into strength that will help other women avoid the same fate. Amy Walker, the former nurse whose career had been derailed by Nathan's public humiliation, wiped tears from her eyes as she stood to applaud. One by one, the other survivors joined her, then the professionals, then the entire room erupted in standing ovation that seemed to shake the building's foundation. When the applause finally died down, Alana continued with quiet intensity. The man who hurt me, who hurt all of us, made a choice 6 months ago. He chose accountability over denial, prison over prolonged suffering, truth over self-protection. His confession led to the arrests of 12 other attorneys involved in similar patterns of abuse and fraud. His victims received justice not just in courts of law, but in courts of public opinion that finally recognized their pain as real and their recovery as important. She pulled out a letter, its pages worn from multiple readings. Last week, I received this letter from Federal Correctional Institution in Allenwood, Pennsylvania. Nathan Cole wrote to apologize not just for his crimes, but for the mindset that made those crimes possible. He's teaching financial literacy classes to other inmates and participating in therapy programs designed to help abusers understand the impact of their actions. Alana folded the letter carefully. I don't share this to excuse his behavior or minimize the harm he caused. I share it because transformation is possible, even for people who've done terrible things. Even for people who've hurt us so deeply that we thought healing was impossible. The room was absolutely silent now, everyone hanging on her words. But here's what I've learned about forgiveness. It's not about letting someone off the hook for their crimes. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of carrying their guilt. It's about choosing to build something beautiful from the ashes of what was destroyed. She gestured around the beautiful space they were dedicating. This center exists because a cruel man taught me that I was ordinary. In trying to diminish me, he revealed my true power. In breaking my heart, he showed me how to heal other people's hearts. In calling me inadequate, he proved that I was more than adequate. I was necessary. Dr. Sarah Walker stood up in the audience. Miss Brooks, could you tell us what the center's mission statement means to you personally? Alana smiled, reciting words that had been engraved on a plaque by the entrance. We believe that every person deserves to be valued for who they are, not what they have. We believe that love should elevate, not diminish. We believe that true strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. She paused, her voice growing softer, but somehow more powerful. We believe that the word ordinary should never be used as an insult, because ordinary people do extraordinary things every single day. They love deeply, work honestly, and treat others with dignity. They build families and communities and futures that matter more than any fortune. Jennifer Martinez stood up from her seat. Miss Brooks, what would you say to women who are currently trapped in relationships with men like Nathan Cole? Alana's expression grew fierce with protective energy. I would tell them that their pain is real, their worth is not determined by someone else's opinion, and help is available. I would tell them that the person hurting them is not extraordinary. They're profoundly ordinary in the most damaging way possible. She looked directly at Jennifer, her voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. I would tell them that they are not alone, they are not crazy, and they deserve better. I would tell them that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who reveal our greatest strength. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of the bronze plaque, but the real climax came when each of Nathan's victims approached Alana individually, not to thank her for their settlements, but to thank her for showing them that survival could become service, that pain could become power, that ordinary women could do extraordinary things. As the crowd dispersed, Alana found herself alone with Margaret in the empty conference room, looking out at the city where her life had been shattered and rebuilt. "Are you satisfied with how it ended?" Margaret asked quietly. Alana considered the question for a long moment. Nathan is in prison, his victims have found peace, and the system that enabled his behavior has been exposed and reformed. 12 other predators are facing justice because one woman refused to accept that she was ordinary. She turned from the window, her expression thoughtful. "But more than that, I've learned who I really am. Not Marcus Brooks' daughter, not a billionaire heiress, not someone defined by what she owns or inherits. I'm someone who chooses to use her gifts to heal instead of harm." Margaret smiled. "Your father would be proud." "I think he would. But more importantly, I'm proud. For the first time in my life, I'm proud of who I've become instead of ashamed of who I was." As they walked toward the exit, Alana passed a young woman sitting in the lobby, clearly gathering courage to approach the reception desk. The woman looked up as Alana passed, and their eyes met for just a moment. "Excuse me," the woman said quietly. Are you the woman who started this place?" "I'm one of the women who started this place," Alana corrected gently. "We all started it together. Everyone who chose healing over hiding, truth over silence, hope over despair." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I saw the news about what happened with your fiancé. About how he called you ordinary." Alana sat down beside her, her voice soft but strong. "What's your name?" "Michelle. My boyfriend says. He says I'm lucky he tolerates me because nobody else would want me. He says I'm nothing special, just ordinary." Alana's heart clenched with familiar pain, but also with fierce protectiveness. "Michelle, let me tell you something about being ordinary. Ordinary people wake up every day and choose kindness over cruelty. Ordinary people work hard for modest pay and treat their colleagues with respect. Ordinary people love deeply without conditions or calculations." She leaned closer, her voice carrying absolute conviction. "The most extraordinary thing about being ordinary is that it means you're decent, honest, and real. Anyone who uses that word as an insult is telling you exactly who they are. Someone so inadequate that they have to tear down others to feel adequate themselves." Michelle wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But what if he's right? What if I really am just not enough?" "Then you're not enough for him," Alana said firmly. "And that makes him the luckiest failure in the world, because it means you'll find someone worthy of who you are instead of wasting your extraordinariness on someone too ordinary to recognize it." As Michelle walked toward the reception desk to begin her journey toward healing, Alana felt the final piece of her transformation click into place. She'd been broken by someone who called her ordinary, but she'd been rebuilt by the recognition that ordinary was extraordinary, that healing was holy, and that the greatest revenge was becoming so magnificently yourself that your enemy's opinions became irrelevant. Nathan Cole had tried to diminish her, and in doing so, had revealed the full scope of her power. He'd called her ordinary, never realizing that he was giving her the highest compliment possible. She was ordinary in the most extraordinary way, and now she would spend the rest of her life proving that ordinary people could change the world, one healed heart at a time. The woman who'd once hidden from her inheritance had finally learned how to inherit herself. 2 years later, Alana Brooks stood in the gardens of her father's estate, no longer the sprawling monument to wealth it had once been, but something warmer, a retreat center where survivors of emotional abuse could find peace among the roses her mother had planted decades earlier. The morning sun cast long shadows across the carefully maintained paths where women walked with therapists, finding their voices again in spaces designed for healing. Today marked a milestone she'd never expected to celebrate: the 2nd anniversary of the Dr. Marcus Brooks Foundation and the graduation of their first class of women who'd completed the full recovery program. Margaret approached across the garden, carrying a tablet and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who'd just received excellent news. "The numbers are in from this morning's board meeting," Margaret announced, her voice carrying pride that went far deeper than financial success. "Brooks Innovations stock has reached an all-time high. The company's reputation for ethical leadership is attracting the industry's best talent, and the foundation has funded similar centers in 12 cities across the country." Alana smiled, but her attention was focused on a woman practicing a presentation near the Rose Gardens gazebo: Dr. Jennifer Martinez, former elementary school teacher, current advocate for educational reforms targeting emotional abuse prevention. Jennifer had not only rebuilt her life, but had become one of the Foundation's most powerful voices, speaking at universities and conferences about the psychology of manipulation and recovery. More importantly, Alana said, watching Jennifer's confident gestures, "Look what we've built." The estate grounds bustled with quiet purpose. Amy Walker, the former nurse who'd fled Philadelphia after Nathan's humiliation, had returned as the Foundation's medical director, developing treatment protocols that were being adopted by trauma centers nationwide. Lisa Rodriguez had started a legal clinic providing free representation to abused survivors navigating divorce and custody battles. Each woman had taken her pain and transformed it into power that helped others heal. "Miss Brooks," a young voice called from behind them. Alana turned to see Sophie Williams, a 19-year-old college student who'd joined the Foundation as an intern after surviving an abusive relationship with her high school boyfriend. Sophie carried herself with the careful confidence of someone who'd learned to trust her own worth again. "The media is here for your interview," Sophie said, then hesitated. "Miss Brooks, can I ask you something personal?" "Always. Do you ever regret it? The way everything happened with Nathan Cole? Part of me wishes my ex could have learned and grown like he did, instead of just disappearing from my life." Alana considered the question carefully. It was one she'd asked herself countless times over the past 2 years. "Sophie, Nathan's growth happened because he faced consequences, not despite them. If I'd forgiven him without justice, if I'd taken him back without accountability, he would have learned that his behavior was acceptable. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst impulses." She gestured toward the women working throughout the gardens. "Every woman here represents a choice. The choice to demand better, to refuse to accept ordinary as an insult, to transform pain into purpose. Nathan grew because women like us finally said enough." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "And now he's helping other men understand what he put you through." That was true. Nathan's letters from prison had evolved from apologies to insights, and eventually to requests for permission to share his story as part of the Foundation's education programs. His recorded testimony about the psychology of emotional abuse had become one of their most powerful tools for helping both survivors and perpetrators understand the dynamics of manipulation. "The most extraordinary thing about ordinary people," Alana said, echoing words that had become the Foundation's unofficial motto, "is their capacity for growth. Even the people who hurt us." The media interview took place in the estate's library, where Alana's father had once taught her about the responsibility that came with power. The interviewer, Carol Rivera from Philadelphia Magazine, had been following the story since Nathan's arrest 2 years earlier. "Miss Brooks," Carol began, "when this story first broke, many people saw it as a classic revenge tale, the billionaire heiress destroying the man who wronged her. But it's become something much larger than that. Revenge implies that the goal was to cause pain," Alana replied, settled in the leather chair where her father had once read her bedtime stories. "My goal was to prevent pain, both for Nathan's future victims and for the women he'd already hurt. Sometimes justice and healing require the same actions that revenge would take, but the motivation makes all the difference." The Foundation has helped over 3,000 women in 2 years. Brooks Innovations has become a model for ethical corporate leadership. Nathan Cole's rehabilitation has been cited in criminal justice reform studies. "How do you view your impact?" Alana smiled, thinking of Michelle, the woman she'd met at the center's opening, who is now completing her master's degree in social work with full funding from the Foundation. "I view it as proof that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to let pain make them smaller. Every woman who walks through our doors proves that survival is just the beginning. Transformation is the real victory." Carol leaned forward. "There are rumors that you're considering a run for Senate, focusing on legislation to protect emotional abuse survivors. Can you confirm that?" "I can confirm that I've learned the difference between having power and using it wisely. Whether that happens in corporate boardrooms, Foundation meetings, or political office, that remains to be seen." After the interview, Alana walked through the estate's grounds as evening approached, visiting each of the programs that had grown from her father's foundation. The art therapy studio where survivors rediscovered their creativity. The career development center where women learned new skills and rebuilt professional confidence. The children's program where kids learned healthy relationship dynamics. She found herself at her father's grave as the sun set, a simple headstone that read, "Dr. Marcus Brooks. He taught us that the greatest discoveries come from understanding suffering and working to eliminate it." "I think I understand now, Dad," she said quietly, placing fresh flowers on the grave. You didn't leave me a company. You left me a calling. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Miss Brooks, my name is David Walker. I've been emotionally abusing my girlfriend for 2 years, and I want to stop. I saw Nathan Cole's video about getting help. Can you tell me how to get treatment? Alana stared at the message, recognizing it as proof that their work was reaching even perpetrators, that the cycle of abuse could be broken before more hearts were shattered. She typed back, David, acknowledging the problem is the first step toward solving it. Call our helpline tomorrow at 9 a.m. Help is available and change is possible. As she walked back toward the main house, now converted into administrative offices for the foundation, Alana reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 3 years ago, she'd been a woman hiding from her own power, trying to be ordinary in a world that demanded excellence. 2 years ago, she'd been shattered by betrayal and driven by pain. Tonight, she was exactly who she'd always been meant to be. Someone who used her gifts to heal instead of harm, who transformed suffering into service, who proved that the most extraordinary thing about ordinary people was their infinite capacity for growth. Her father had built an empire of medicine and innovation. She was building an empire of healing and hope. The difference, she realized, was that her empire would never be inherited. It would be earned day by every person who chose healing over hatred, growth over grievance, love over revenge. Margaret appeared on the house's front steps, silhouetted against the warm light spilling from the windows. Ready to go inside, Miss Brooks? Tomorrow's schedule is quite full. 3 interviews, 2 foundation meetings, and a video conference with the Seattle Center's opening committee. Actually, Alana said, looking back at the gardens where survivors were still walking, talking, healing under the stars, I'm not Miss Brooks anymore. Margaret raised an eyebrow. I'm just Alana. Someone who learned that being ordinary is the most extraordinary thing you can be. As they walked toward the house together, Alana's phone buzzed with another message, this one from Jennifer Martinez. Alana, I wanted you to know, I got engaged tonight. To a man who thinks I'm extraordinary exactly as I am. None of this would have been possible without you showing me that I deserved better. Alana smiled, understanding that this was what victory looked like. Not the destruction of enemies, but the elevation of friends. Not the accumulation of power, but the multiplication of hope. She'd started this journey as a woman called ordinary by someone too limited to recognize extraordinary when he saw it. She was ending it as someone who'd learned that extraordinary was just another word for choosing love over fear, healing over hatred, purpose over pain. The woman Nathan Cole had dismissed as not good enough for his world had built a world where everyone was good enough, where ordinary was celebrated, where broken hearts became healing hands. And tomorrow, she would wake up and continue building that world, one survivor at a time, one story at a time, one transformed life at a time. Because that's what extraordinary ordinary people do. They change the world simply by refusing to let the world break them. The real revenge, Alana had learned, wasn't making Nathan Cole pay for his cruelty. It was becoming so magnificently herself that his opinion, and the opinion of anyone like him, became completely irrelevant. She was ordinary. She was extraordinary. She was exactly enough. And she was just getting started.